Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's panel, Connecting Offshore Wind to California's Grid, Accelerating Transmission Planning and Interconnection. My name is Arne Fero, and I am an energy regulatory attorney at the law firm of Davis Wright Tremaine. I primarily represent a variety of energy stakeholders before state agencies such as the Public Utilities Commission and others, and it is my privilege to call Offshore Wind California one of my clients. It is a pleasure to moderate today's discussion, which brings together 4 experts at the intersection of offshore wind, grid planning, environmental review, and regional energy strategy. As we've heard in a variety of the sessions so far, transmission planning is one of the major 3 precursors for offshore wind, together with the supply chain build-out and the port build-outs. I'd like to start by introducing our 4 panelists. First, we have Travis Douville, Advisor for Energy Systems Integration at the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. Travis specializes in bringing new resources like offshore wind onto the grid through a mix of technical modeling, policy integration, and regional planning. Next to him is Arne Jacobson, Director of the Schatz Energy Research Center at Cal Poly Humboldt, one of the leading research institutions studying the North Coast's renewable energy potential. His recent work includes feasibility studies and strategic planning for offshore wind integration and community engagement in remote and under-resourced regions of California. Joining us as well is Susan Lee, Vice President at Aspen Environmental. Susan brings over 30 years of experience in environmental permitting, transmission siting, and stakeholder engagement. She has led major CEQA and NEPA reviews across California and is closely involved in evaluating the long-term transmission build-out needed to meet the state's clean energy targets. And finally, I welcome Marco Rios, who manages transmission system planning at PG&E. Marco is deeply involved in the ISO's planning process and oversees how new resources, like offshore wind, are safely and reliably connected to the grid. I'm going to kick things off with a brief outline or roadmap of what we will be discussing today. We will begin with an overview of the current transmission infrastructure in the central and north coasts. Then we will discuss the ISO's current transmission projects for the north coast, which were approved in the 2023-24 transmission plan. We will touch on some of the challenges of siting and developing those projects, as well as potential challenges for offshore wind transmission on the central coast. Looking beyond the first 10 gigawatts of offshore wind, we will look at the ISO's 20-year outlook for California's energy and transmission needs. Then we will widen our scope a little to touch on more regional West Coast transmission planning and coordination. We will dive a little further into the challenges of planning and siting transmission in new locations, and our discussion will wrap up with some thoughts on how transmission can provide benefits to host communities. And if we have any remaining time, we will open the floor up to audience Q&A. So let's start by looking at the current landscape. Arne, could you describe the state of transmission infrastructure along California's central and north coasts?
Sure, I can start that off. And if we maybe just starting with the transmission map and getting people oriented, the map shows the existing transmission system. The on-land, the lines that are shown on land are existing transmission lines with thicker lines indicating higher capacity lines and thinner lines, smaller, lower capacity lines. Also shown on the map are tribal lands, which are shown in yellow, and then offshore you can see some of the marine protected areas, and then just now shown circled in red are the wind energy areas, the 2 lease blocks in the Humboldt Wind Energy Area on the north coast and the Morro Bay Wind Energy Area on the central coast. So it just gives a little bit of a sense of the lay of the land for where things are located. From this, you can see that there's very limited transmission infrastructure serving the north coast. Just two very, what I would describe as, in the transmission world technical terms, two capillaries that are running out to the coast to serve that region currently. Whereas, of course, on the central coast, there's larger transmission lines that come out to the coast primarily to provide transmission for the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant. So that's sort of existing, very short overview, existing lay of the land. Maybe diving a little bit more into the north coast, so zooming in on the Humboldt region's electrical infrastructure. It's relatively isolated from the main California grid, as I mentioned. The main transmission lines run along the I-5 corridor, and so if offshore wind were to be developed, there would be a need to develop fairly significant transmission capacity to reach that main system. The regional load in the area is concentrated in the Humboldt Bay region. The average load is about 90 megawatts, and as a point of reference, the generation capacity in the Humboldt Wind Energy Area has been estimated as anywhere from about 1,500 to maybe 3,000 to 4,000 megawatts. So many times the regional load. I think the other thing to know about the local system is that the two transmission lines that do exist are small enough that neither one of them can support the regional load on their own. And in order to operate the local system, we need power generation regionally, and the 163 megawatt natural gas-fired Humboldt Bay generating station plays this role. So that without that natural gas power plant, the regional Humboldt system currently, as it's set up, would not be able to operate. And that natural gas power plant is supplied primarily by a single natural gas pipeline that runs from the upper Sacramento Valley over to Humboldt. So we're, in some ways, a single point of failure away from being in a pretty precarious situation on the north coast from an electrical perspective. So,
Thank you, Arne. Marco, as a PG&E transmission planner, can you give us a little bit of detail about the ISO's current transmission project plans to serve the Humboldt area?
Absolutely. And first of all, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having me. I do want to step back for a little bit because I think I want to call out the excellent job that the California ISO is doing in planning the grid overall for this integration to happen. We know, and we'll touch on the project that was just approved and awarded now. But before that, the CAISO a few years back decided to approve other expansion projects that are now a part of the overall plan. Starting with Fern. Fern was a project that was approved back in 2018, 2019. It's a 500 kV station. The original need was to add voltage support to the 500 kV system, but the CAISO did a really good job in specifying that station is to be expandable, so that now is going to be part of the larger plan. A couple of years later, in 2022, the CAISO then approved Collinsville substation. That is down closer to the Bay Area. It's in Solano County, but it's got connections to Contra Costa County, and the design is to be able to serve the greater Bay Area load. Those two stations are part of the plan that the CAISO approved last year, which entails building a brand new 500 kV station at Humboldt and two 500 kV lines. One of the 500 kV lines will go directly to Fern. Again, that's the new station. And by the way, Fern is under development. I believe the plan is to have it in service at the end of this year or early 2026. So it'll be ready by the time these new lines come in. The second line, it's a high voltage DC line that is going from the new Humboldt substation into Collinsville. That line will be operated as AC initially, and it will terminate at Collinsville. And the nice feature of that is again directly connecting to serving the load in our major load center in the Greater Bay Area. There are other minor upgrades that the CAISO approved as part of the plan due to the push that these lines have onto the grid, but those are minor relative. The key components are those two 500 kV lines and the station, but also PG&E, we're really excited about the 115 kV line that comes with the project. Arne mentioned the reliability concerns with the local, for the local community, and that new 115 kV line will be able to provide increased resiliency to the area, reliability, capacity for future load in the pocket. So we're excited about that. That 115 kV line was assigned to PG&E, so we will be building that when the time comes. And now for the announcement, I guess the most recent announcement about the large projects, those were the CAISO selected a sponsor for the project is Veridon, and they were awarded the project as of Friday. And there isn't a lot of details on their actual project that the CAISO approved. I think over the next few days, there will be a selection report that will be published, so we'll get a little more insight into that. But by 2034, 2035, that project should be going into service.
Thank you. Susan, I know you've studied this Humboldt area. From your perspective, what are some of the challenges that these new projects will be facing?
Thanks, Anna. There are several. Let me just make a distinction between the siting studies that we did for the Energy Commission and the type of permitting that has to happen for one of these lines to actually get constructed. What we did for the Energy Commission was study 7 different ways of getting from Humboldt down to Collinsville and to Fern. We did this with the help of Arne's team at Schatz. We looked at 7 different corridors and looked at what would be the relative pros and cons of siting in those different corridors. What we're looking at now is permitting. So we have had a developer selected. They've selected probably one of the 7 routes we looked at. We're not really sure. But what they're doing now is they're going to start the CEQA-NEPA process. They will get an application into the CPUC and an application into the Forest Service for the federal land crossing. So they're going to be dealing with what I think are the most likely permitting challenges. Number one is dealing with NEPA. Federal agencies right now, land management agencies, are under a lot of constraints, staffing constraints, process constraints. They have very strict time limits for completing NEPA, which means that they basically pull all the requirements ahead of the NEPA process. So all the bio and cultural surveys have to be done early. Native American coordination consultation has to start early. They are often understaffed. I think the process dealing with the Trinity National Forest could be super challenging and time-consuming. In coordination with that, the CPUC will be doing the CEQA process, trying to align the time frame in a way that makes sense. One advantage, if the developer has chosen the southern route, which was on, I don't know if that map is still up or not, is it? Yeah, the southern route that goes south from Humboldt down to Cottonwood, there's a 368 corridor, Energy Policy Act 368 corridor, along, not continuous, but along almost 30 miles of that prioritizes energy development within the national forest. So there's an advantage there in terms of permitting. The biggest environmental challenges, I think, will be associated first with biological resources. There are going to be thousands of trees cut down for this project. It's a very heavily forested area, and it has a large population of protected species, in particular birds. So that's going to be a big challenge. The other thing is there are a lot of communities in here. It looks like You know, you don't see any towns dotted around on there, but there are small communities all along that transmission line which follows a highway. And so the public outreach and getting the public on board and understanding what's happening before this whole project is dropped on them as a need, I think is going to be super important. It's not a permitting need, but if public opposition becomes very strong, the permitting can become a lot more difficult.
Turning now to the Central Coast for a moment, can you describe how Diablo Canyon's future has major implications for transmission planning? What are some of the key challenges here in terms of timing of the nuclear power plant's retirement or allocation of that transmission capacity, potential upgrades to the transmission infrastructure? Marco?
I'll start, thank you. Yeah, so thanks for pulling up that chart or diagram. As it shows, definitely it's better situated than the North Coast. There is 3 500 kV lines that today connect to Diablo Canyon. And then we also have a 230 kV system. I believe there's four 230 kV lines that are connected to the local pocket. So seemingly there should be sufficient capacity, but the reality of it is that with Diablo Canyon and on there currently operational, a good amount of that 500 kV capacity is occupied by Diablo Canyon. From numbers that the study that the California ISO has put out, without Diablo Canyon, the available capacity should be around 5,000 megawatts. With Diablo Canyon in place, it drops down to like 3,000. So there's still a good amount, but not the full, capacity available for all the potential in the pocket. Diablo Canyon is currently operating through 2030, and we don't know what other decision is going to happen at that point. But if we needed to upgrade the 500 kV system at that point, I think you're looking at 500 kV lines again, maybe at least 1 or 2 going back to the main bulk system, and then the 230 kV system is limited as well. Even though there's a site for the old Morro Bay power plant, there are solar power plants along those lines that are taking up the capacity at this moment. So you're looking at major upgrades there as well. Arne, I don't know if there's any additional stuff you want to add.
I think that's good for now. We can keep moving.
All right, so we've been discussing the more immediate transmission plans for the Humboldt and what the current situation is on the Central Coast. Zooming out a bit, Susan, what does the ISO's 20-year outlook tell us about California's long-term transmission needs for offshore wind, especially as we move beyond the initial 10 gigawatt targets for the current lease areas?
Very good question. Can we put up that statewide map that's from there? Thank you. So there's a lot on this map, and I know you probably can't see the detail, but I'll point out just a few things here. One of the things we're working on right now for the Energy Commission is actually looking at each one of the new or expanded transmission corridors that would result from this 20-year outlook, and looking at which ones of those have serious constraints either to expanding their corridors or building a new corridor or adding a substation. So we've been kind of deep into this map. Just as an overview, the 20-year outlook assumes 20 gigawatts of offshore wind. It includes double our current capacity for solar, double our capacity for offshore wind imports, lots of storage. You'll see a lot of lines coming into this map from the east and the northeast. That's mostly out-of-state wind, also some out-of-state solar. There's some real challenges there. One of the big dotted red line coming in from the east is the theoretical new line that would cross the Sierras, which has been on probably everyone's sort of wish list, but a very challenging project to develop. All that said, let me focus on the offshore wind part. There are two really main components here of future transmission that would serve offshore wind. One of them is the onshore part, which actually looks very much like what we just talked about. It's 2 additional AC lines coming to Fern, 2 additional lines going to Collinsville, which we already described. Those are in addition to the 2 that were just approved. So basically, they're going to be, assuming the route is what we think it might be, between Humboldt and basically the Reading area, 2 lines coming in the first 10-year plan, 4 more lines coming in the 20-year outlook. So it's a dramatic change to that right-of-way. The other thing that would happen in the onshore in the 20-year outlook is an expansion of the Morro Bay substation to add a 500 kV line there, which goes to what Marco was just talking about, which would allow an interconnection between Morro Bay substation and Diablo, and also interconnect to the 500 kV system. The really exciting part of the 20-year outlook, and this ties back to what we've heard this morning and what Travis talked about this morning, is the offshore network. We really are going to need an offshore network. If you look at this map, the dashed lines that are basically in the ocean, going from Del Norte to Humboldt to Mendocino to the Bay Area, and then down to Moss Landing, is what is predicted to be needed in order to interconnect the 15 or so gigawatts of offshore wind that will come from the North Coast. And this is not just the Humboldt wind energy area, but future sea space that's been studied up there. The real challenges for the offshore part, the onshore part we've talked about already. It's national forests, some really intense permitting challenge. The offshore part is somewhat similar to the offshore floating turbines. Water depth is a huge challenge. We have not put electrical cables in the water depth we have out here for these leases. We're going to need water depth of 3,000 to 4,000 meters, which is not technically feasible yet. One of the maps Arne showed a minute ago also showed the national marine sanctuaries, which extend from Point Arena almost all the way down to Point Conception, with that one gap at Morro Bay. Yeah, that's a good one. Those red shaded areas need to have transmission cables in them. We've talked to the marine sanctuaries. They don't straight out say no. There are fiber optic cables in almost all of them, so we like to think there is a permitting path for a subsea cable to come into the San Francisco Bay. There's especially big challenges coming into the San Francisco Bay because there are so many uses and shipping travel and restricted areas in the bay. The other big challenge out here, of course, and we talked about this, there was a panel on this yesterday, marine resources, including whales, seabirds, essential fish habitat, all kinds of coordination required with NOAA for permitting and the Fish and Wildlife Service. And as with the other projects we've talked about, there will need to be a lot of coordination for these cables with the Native American tribes and with fisheries folks. So the thing that I'd like to conclude with is that I think this 20-year outlook is a fantastic service and a notice to all of us about where we need to be planning. And I'm hoping that it will be used as we move forward through the next few years to really look at where we need to expand our transmission system and open up kind of a new planning system as we move forward.
Thank you, Susan. Travis, don't want to leave you out of the discussion. So I know you've authored a number of publications related to technical modeling, policy integration, and regional planning. More recently, your West Coast offshore wind transmission study and the Development Action Plan both address the need for more regional coordinated infrastructure. Can you highlight what some of the important takeaways are from those publications and what they mean for California?
Absolutely, and I want to say that I believe it's appropriate to focus so much on California. Arne and I were talking, I think this is maybe our 4th time up here. I don't know if we should say that in front of everyone, but it's our 4th time. And I think this year in particular, it makes sense to really focus on California. In the past, we have talked a bit more about the coordination across regions, and I will say a few things about that. That was a major focus of the study. I also want to make sure people know that I'm representing work of a large group of people. So 60 different researchers involved in the action plan and the West Coast Offshore Wind Transmission Study, which I led. I guess 3 things I would note from the study that are relevant to this conversation. First of all, piggybacking on things Susan was saying, that geospatial analysis, when we think about coordinating with Oregon in particular, since there's really such a great resource here that extends from this Northern California region across the Oregon-California border into Southern Oregon, all the way up to Coos Bay, Florence area on the Oregon coast. Just how limited the space is really was quite surprising to us when we did that analysis. So I had a slide on that earlier. You can tell we love maps. We love to put these maps together. I think they're quite informative. What we find is that the number's around 30 gigawatts up there. So if we need to go beyond 30 gigawatts, and that includes what Oregon wants to do, and of course what California is well in motion to accomplish, we then would need to go further westward or further northward. If we go further out to the west, that incurs greater cost of energy due to the export cable, increased export cable distances. If we need to go further north, the wind resource drops off, at least in terms of the average wind speeds, and potentially the capacity contribution might also erode as you go farther north, depending on how north you go. So, the best stuff is sort of limited to that 30 gigawatts initially. Shouldn't stop us, but that's still quite a big number. The other 2 notes have to do with those system net benefits. So I showed a slide this morning that indicated a great deal of benefit through coordinated transmission. And we, in particular, studied an intra-regional, if folks can remember from back when you were having your coffee this morning, an intra-regional network and an inter-regional. And only that inter-regional topology set enhanced the connection between the Pacific Core West to Bonneville and then all the way down to CAISO territory. So improving increasing the flow potential between those regions. And that was the one that was the most valuable. So if we don't have that connection, the potential benefits drop off significantly. They're almost half. So that really indicates how important it is to coordinate and extend this transmission build up to the north. If you only build it out in California, there will be a limit in terms of the overall benefit that one could achieve. So it really makes sense to coordinate north of the California-Oregon border in particular. The last thing that I'll call out, which was not shown in a slide, so you have to read the report for this one. But I'll give you a Cliff's Notes version, which is that when we think about who pays, which is always a tricky subject, when we think about the difference between that intra case and the inter case, remember in the inter case we increase the transfer capacity between regions. In the intra case we do not. Though we see benefits for California ratepayers in both cases, when we disaggregate by geography, we see, and I'm from the Pacific Northwest, so we see Pacific Northwest ratepayers being stuck with a significant piece of that bill. And I think that will pose major challenges to executing. And that really is a warning for planners in the north to keep up, I think. If California goes gangbusters and folks in the Pacific Northwest and planners in Bonneville and even Pacific Core West aren't staying apprised of what's going on and similarly upgrading their system, they could be left with congestion that comes from, that would naturally fall out of serving flows to the north with all this extra capacity that's coming out of the California system. So that's just a cautionary note, and that's another reason to coordinate, to answer your question.
Thank you, Travis. Susan, you touched on this earlier with regards to the Humboldt area specifically, but can you speak more broadly to what makes planning and siting transmission so difficult in new locations?
Sure. Interestingly, siting in new locations is not always the hardest thing. Some of it is expanding capacity where it is already. One of the things we're seeing around the state when we're looking at these forward-looking siting studies is the expansion of suburbia, basically. If you look at Reading or Tracy or Adelanto or Victorville, areas that were very small communities 10 or 20 years ago now have expansive kind of suburbia right up to the edge of what we used to think of as transmission corridors that would be available forever. And now they're very much hemmed in on both sides by houses, leaving very little room for expansion and the requirement for the engineering team to get really creative about how to expand in there. So when we're looking at a new area, really the first thing we look at is where you can't go. Take off the table. You can't go where there's houses. No one's going to want to take houses in order to put in a transmission line. You can't go where there are legal or legislative prohibitions, places like national parks, DOD lands, wilderness areas, they're off the table. Things that make it hard but not impossible are things like critical habitat, where you have to deal with Fish and Wildlife Service to get permits. The permits are challenging and the mitigation can be very expensive, but it's theoretically doable. Really what I think we need to be doing is looking at the bigger picture solutions. And what the solutions should be, in my mind, is corridor planning. We've talked about this a lot with the Energy Commission. You know, in 2013 and again in 2017, we worked with the Energy Commission and the CPUC on READY, the Renewable Energy Transmission Initiative. I think it's time for a third READY right now, focusing on the 20-year outlook, where we look at where we need to be in 2045, because 2045 is our target year for SB 100. Look at the transmission that's on the table now and work at trying to identify corridors, and then the next step, figure out if it's possible to protect these corridors. The Energy Commission has the authority to designate transmission corridors on non-federal lands, and it's an option that has been considered a few times at the Energy Commission. Something that I think will be probably more important as we move forward into a more kind of challenging and congested transmission development period.
All right. I'm going to move into our final topic for today. Arne, I know you have focused on strategic planning for offshore wind integration and community engagement in remote and under-resourced regions of California. How can transmission infrastructure deliver real benefits to these regions beyond just bringing power onto the grid?
That is something we've spent quite a bit of focusing on, especially thinking about the Humboldt region. And actually, if the map of the Humboldt region can come back up, I think it's easier to talk about. But I think the short story is that as I'd mentioned earlier, the Humboldt region has very limited access to electrical and natural gas infrastructure as it's currently set up, and is vulnerable both from an outage perspective, especially in the event of a large earthquake or another disaster. There could be circumstances where the system was very limited for an extended period of time, as it currently is set up. And there are also capacity limits in association with being able to expand certain kinds of activities. So the transmission system, as it's designed by CAISO, and want to give them a lot of credit for doing it this way, is not just to serve the ability to deliver the offshore wind generation to large load centers. Because of the local connection that Marco had talked about, it will provide significant capacity and reliability benefits to the Humboldt Bay region in particular, which is where a large fraction of the population in the Humboldt Bay region or the Humboldt County is located. And so I think designing transmission solutions so they're not just thinking about moving power from one place to the other, but also providing reliability benefits to communities that are hosting this infrastructure is quite important. I also think it's important to think about what doesn't get served with the system as it's planned. As you can see from the map, the Humboldt Bay region is where the two 115 kilovolt lines are located, and that's the area that will be most served by the new infrastructure and the connection to the local system. But some of the communities that are on smaller circuits that run out from that, their reliability issues and their capacity issues have more to do with the limitations of those smaller transmission lines and with the distribution systems in their region. And those issues won't automatically be addressed with the transmission system. And so it's important for us to think holistically and to identify solutions also for those communities so that we end up with an inclusive solution for how we're addressing electrical infrastructure. So transmission alone can't solve all of the issues. We also need to be thinking about the distribution side. And so there, we have been especially focused on renewable energy microgrids as a way of trying to provide resilience at the substation level and within communities to address some of the reliability issues associated with the smaller transmission lines and distribution circuits. We're pretty excited about some of the things that we've been able to do with partners, in particular in partnership with some of the Native American tribes in our region, as well as the Redwood Coast Energy Authority and PG&E. And we think that thinking in that holistic way, what can transmission do, but what are some of the complementary solutions that we also need to pull things together is the right way to be thinking about this.
Thank you so much. I think we have run out of time for audience Q&A. So I'm going to thank our panelists, Travis, Arne, Susan, Marco, for such an insightful discussion. It's clear that connecting offshore wind to California's grid is both a technical and environmental and community-driven challenge, but with this amount of expertise and study and passion, I'm feeling very optimistic that we can get it right. Thank you, all of you.